This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. If you're looking for cards in the US, look no further as you can use the promo code MTGMuddstah to get you 5% off anything on the site. Or if you're in Canada like me, you can use the same promo code at Multizone to get 10% off your orders of singles. If cards aren't what you're looking for, Original Magic Art has playmats, tokens, and sweet art that you can use that same promo code to help you get 5% off your order there. If you're looking to bling out your cards, using Alter Sleeves is a great way to do so, and you can click the affiliate link in my About section to help out the channel as you make an order. And if you just want to help out the channel, you can always consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month and join the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game was filmed through Discord, and I'm playing Trostani, keeping Angel of Sanctions, Bountiful Promenade, Angel of Finality, Scavenger Ground, Rootborn Defenses, Enlightened Tutor, and an Arctic Tree Line. Matt has joined us, aka Mountain Mage, the dude you go to if you want to get cards signed, and I've included some links to his Facebook and Twitter down below. He's playing Damia and keeps a Temple of Mystery, 2 snow-covered islands, Necromancy, Kodama's Reach, Glade Muse, and a Sultai Charm. Brandon is playing Ashaya, keeping a Dryad Arbor, 4 forests, Finned Horn Elves, and Oracle of Muddstah. His husband Matthew is playing Ishai and Kodama, keeping Ghostly Flicker, Explore, Rejuvenating Spring, Island, Glacial Fortress, Soul Ring, and Thassa Deep Dwelling. I win the die roll and start us off. I play an Arctic Tree Line, passing. Matt plays a Temple of Mystery, scrying the card to the bottom. Brandon plays a Forest and casts a Finned Horn Elves. Matthew plays an Island and casts a classic Turn 1 Soul Ring. I play a Bountiful Promenade and then cast a Rampant Growth, going to find a forest. Matt plays a Snow-Covered Island and passes. Brandon plays a Dryad Arbor. Matthew plays a Rejuvenating Spring and then casts Explore. He plays a Glacial Fortress as an extra land for turn and passes back to me. I play a Scavenger Grounds and cast Fauna Shaman. Matt casts a Kodama's Reach and goes to find 2 lands, playing 1 for turn, and I shortcut casting Enlightened Tutor to go and find a Soul Ring to put on top. Brandon plays a Forest and casts an Oracle of Muddstah, revealing a crop rotation off the top. Matthew casts Ishai, one of his 2 partner commanders, and then just plays a Forest. I draw the Soul Ring for turn and cast it. I draw the Soul Ring for turn and play a Reliquary as my land drop, and then cast the Soul Ring, and then activate my Fauna Shaman. I discard Angel of Finality and go and find a Wood Elves, which I then cast. With its Enter the Battlefield trigger, I go and find a Temple Garden, putting it into play tapped, and pass. Matt plays a land and casts a Victory Chimes. He then uses it and a land to cast Rampant Growth, all the while Matthew's Ishai continues to grow larger and larger as we cast spells. Brandon plays a land from hand and casts his commander Ashaya. He then taps his Oracle, who's now a Forest, to cast a crop rotation, sacrificing a forest to go and find Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, and making everything really a forest now. Matthew plays an Island and casts Karuk's Uprising. He moves to combat, swinging a Ishai at me for 6. Once more, I activate Fauna Shaman in my main phase, discarding a Nyxbloom Ancient and going to find a Karmic Guide. I then cast the Karmic Guide and bring back the Nyxbloom Ancient. I follow up with an Angel of Sanctions, which enters and exiles Ashaya, and Matthew sends his commander to the command zone. Matt just plays a land and casts a Glade Muse. Brandon draws and reveals Survival of the Fittest off the top. He plays a land and then casts a Quirion Ranger. He follows up with Asceticism and moves to combat, swinging Ashaya at Matthew. Before blocks, Matt casts a Sultai Charm to destroy Asceticism, which triggers Glade Muse and draws him a card. After resolving that, Matthew then casts a Rapid Hybridization on Ashaya. This lets him draw a card from the Glade Muse. Responding to the Rapid Hybridization, Brandon uses Quirion Ranger's ability and is able to bounce Ashaya back to his hand before she gets turned into an ape. With nothing else, Brandon passes. Matthew casts Lavinia of the 10th, which detains each non-land permanent with a mana value of 4 or less. With it on the stack, Matt responds and casts Vendelian Click, drawing him a card from the Glade Muse, and its Enter the Battlefield trigger has him look at my hand. I reveal a Rootborn Defenses, which Matt lets me keep. Lavinia then resolves, and Matthew passes. I play a land for turn, and move to combat swinging the Angel at Matt, who takes the hit for 3. Matt plays a land, and then swings a Clique at me, dealing 3 as well. Brandon gets to play 2 lands off the top of his library, and recast Ashaya. In response, Matt pays 6 to cast a Draining Whelk, countering Ashaya, and draining a card off the Glade Muse. Matthew responds to the Whelk, and Arcane denials it, which draws him a card from the Glade Muse as well. The Whelk gets countered, and Ashaya then resolves. Brandon then plays the Survival of the Fittest, and passes turn. Matthew untaps and draws 1 from the Denial and 1 for turn, while Matt draws his 2. Matthew then casted Thassa Deep Dwelling, and the Magic Police come blaring in. In response, Matt casts Necromancy with Flash, targeting my Karmic Guide, which in turn brings back the Draining Whelk. The Karmic Guide does die immediately as it has protection from black, and the Whelk then counters Thassa. This gives it 4+1/+1 counters, and Matthew passes. I cast See the Unwritten in my main phase, revealing my top 8 cards from my library, and getting a Cavalier of Dawn and a Selesnya Eulogist, and bin the rest. The Cavalier entering destroys the Survival of the Fittest, and Brandon activates it in response to the trigger. He discards Reclamation Sage, and goes to find a Stoneseeker Hierophant. I then move to combat and swing the Angel at Matt. This time he blocks the Draining Whelk, which is much bigger, and my Angel dies, and due to the weird rulings, Matthew is able to get back his Ashaya as it does. I then embalms the Angel as it comes in, this time exiling the Draining Whelk, and pass. Matt plays a Morphic Pool as his land for turn, and passes because that's what his Flash Tribal deck does. Brandon gets to play a Mosswarp Bridge off the top, and hides away a card. He plays another land off the top as well, and then pays 3 for Eternal Witness. He targets Aestheticism, and returns it to hand as it enters. He then recasts the Aestheticism, and Matt responds with a Rewind, countering the spell, drawing from the Glade Muse, and untapping 4 lands. Brandon then passes, and I activate the Eulogist, exiling Thassa to populate the Angel of Sanctions token. Responding to the trigger, Matt flashes out a Blizzard Strix, attempting to flicker the token and draw him a card. Before that resolves, I activate the Eulogist again, exiling Reclamation Sage this time to populate once more, and the new copy of the Angel of Sanctions exiles the Glade Muse. The Strix's ability then resolves, getting rid of the original Embalm token, and since the Eulogist's ability doesn't target, I make another one, this time exiling Oracle of Moldiah, and in response, Brandon bounces it back to hand using the Quirion Ranger's ability. Before the turn is over though, Matt casts Rapid Hybridization on the Quirion Ranger, giving Brandon another 3/3. Matthew casts a Mirari's Wake, to which Matt responds to it with a sudden substitution, trading his Draining Whelk with Matt's Mirari's Wake for value. I use 1 forest to cast Cultivate, finding a Plains for the field and a forest to my hand. I then move to combat, swinging my 2 Embalmed Angel tokens, Wood Elves, and the Cavalier at Matt. Matt blocks in such a way to take out both Angels, but before damage, I activate the Eulogist to populate, exiling Arbor Elf from his yard. The copy comes in, exiles the Clique, and we move to damage, with Matt taking 4 and losing the Strix, and I lose 1 Angel token. Matt plays an island for turn and casts his commander, Damia, and passes turn. Brandon plays a Temple of the False God, and then casts the Stoneseeker Hierophant. He then pays 4 to recast Oracle of Moldiah, revealing a Finale of Devastation off the top. He moves to combat, swinging the 2 3/3s and the Eternal Witness at Matt. Before blocks, Matt flashes out Lockmere Serpent. He blocks the Eternal Witness and a token, and before damage, Brandon casts Beast Within to take out Matt's commander, giving him a 3/3. The Eternal Witness is the only casualty, and Matt takes another 3. Matthew taps out and casts an Avenger of Zendikar, and with no response, he puts out 5 plant tokens, and draws a card from Garruk's Uprising. He plays a land for turn, putting a +1/+1 counter onto his plant team because of landfall. He then swings a Ishai at Matt for 5 in the air, and Matt responds with Windgrace's Judgment, and targets a Ishai, the 3/3 token on Brandon's side, and 1 of my Angel tokens. I cast Rootborn Defenses, populating, and giving my board indestructible. Ishai and the 3/3 get taken out, and I make another Angel token, this time exiling the Avenger of Zendikar. I play a land in my main phase, and then tap enough to cast a Regal Force. Matt responds with a Voracious Great Shark, countering the force and drawing a card. And once all that's resolved, I move to combat and get some revenge, swinging 9 in the air at Matt. Matt plays a Swamp, and floats some mana to activate the Serpent, and sacrifices a total of 3 swamps to gain 3 life and draw 3 cards. Matt then recasts his Damia and passes turn. Brandon draws the Finale of Devastation, revealing a forest off the top. He plays it and moves to combat, swinging Ishai at me. I chump with the Cavalier, and exile it upon dying to bring back Song of the World Soul to my hand. Matthew pays 6 and casts Kodama, his other commander. He then casts a Reality Shift to exile my Angel token that has stolen his Avenger. This draws him another card, and makes him 6 more plant tokens as it enters. He then plays a Temple of the False God, and pumps his plant tokens up again, which leaves him with 5 2/3s and 6 1/2s. Matthew also gets a bunch of triggers from Kodama, one of which allows him to put Urian Sky Nomad onto the battlefield, which he uses to target Lavinia, and also puts 2 lands onto the battlefield, putting 2 more +1/+1 counters onto his plant army. With the Avenger triggers on the stack, Brandon uses his Mosswarp Bridge to cast Azuri's Predation, which he'd hidden away, making a beast token for every creature that his opponents control, and then has them fight it. This makes Brandon 28 beast tokens, which take out all of Matthew's plants, Matt's beast token, my Wood Elves, the Eulogist, my Angels, and my Fauna Shaman. This in turn returns the exiled creatures that had been sitting under my Angels, and Matt cliques himself to put a card to the bottom and draw one. Once all that damage is done, Brandon ends up keeping 17 beasts, and Matthew then passes, which has Lavinia come back at the end of turn and detain once more. I cast a Rishkar's Expertise, drawing 5, and then put out a Phyrexian Processor. As it enters, I put 30 life into it, putting myself to 1. I then cast my commander, Trostani, and once that's done, I cast a Panharmonicon, which Matt responds to with a counterspell, which draws him a card from the Glade Muse. I then play a land for turn, and pass. Matt plays a Temple of Malady, scrying a card and keeping it on top. Moving to combat, he swings the Cleek at me, and I activate the Processor to make a token, gaining 30 life. I then take the 3, and Matt passes. Brandon plays his Misty Rainforest, and cracks it to go and find a forest, notably the first damage he's taken all game. He then casts Return to the Wildspeaker, and picks the mode of drawing cards. Unfortunately, he doesn't get any, because it's negated by Matt, who draws a card off the Glade Muse. Matthew casts a Compulsive Research, drawing 3 and discards a land. He plays a land for turn, which with Kodama drops another land. He then casts a God Eternal Ronus, which doubles the power of his creatures, and they gain Vigilance. He then casts Of One Mind, drawing 2 more cards, and moves to combat. He swings Urian at Matt for 8 in the air, to which Matt responds by casting the Murderous Rider's Swift End half to take out Urian. And with that on the stack, I respond by casting Nature's Claim to blow up Norari's Wake. The claim resolves, and Matthew responds with Ghostly Flicker to flicker Urian and the Avenger of Zendikar, fizzling Swift End, and putting out 11 plants this time, and drawing 2 from Garruk's Uprising. And then gets his Kodama triggers, putting out a Cloudkin Seer, drawing a card, putting out 2 more lands, which puts 2 more +1/+1 counters onto his creatures, and then a Peregrine Drake, which untaps 5 lands. Matthew then casts a Torrential Gearhulk, drawing off the Uprising, and gets to cast Ghostly Flicker, flickering the Avenger of Zendikar once more, and the Peregrine Drake, which untaps him 5 more lands, draws him a card as the Avenger enters from the Uprising, and this time makes 13 more plants. He then decides to overload a Cyclonic Rift, which bounces just about everything on his opponent's board, except for Brandon's weird land creatures. I start my turn by rebuilding, and casting a Soul Ring into a Nyxbloom Ancient, and then cycling Secluded Steppe. At the end of my turn, Matt flashes in a Lochmere Serpent. Matt plays a Reliquary Tower, and then pays 3 to recast Victory Chimes, passing. Brandon casts Finale of Devastation, where X is 7, and with it on the stack, uses the Hierophant to untap the Temple of the False God. Brandon goes to find his own Avenger of Zendikar, which puts 16 plants into play, and then passes to his husband. Matthew casts Drawn from Dreams to look at his top 7, and puts 2 to hand, and the rest to bottom. He then plays a land, and gets to put another one out because of Kodama, and then casts an Urban Evolution, drawing 3, and allowing him to play another land, and continues to pump his plant tokens with +1/+1 counters. He casts a Winged Words, drawing 2 more cards, and then a Ponder, choosing to shuffle and then draw. He moves to combat, swinging 13 4/5s at me, 16 6/7s at Matt, and Urian at Brandon. Matt in response casts Vendilion Click and targets Matthew. Matt decides not to use the ability though, and then casts an Evacuation, deciding he's not ready to lose the game. Moving to a second main phase, Matthew then recasts Avenger of Zendikar, putting into play 17 plants this time, and discards down to hand size. I play a land for turn, and recast Trostani. I then cast the Processor once more, putting 27 life into it this time, and pass. Matt plays a land, and recasts Glade Muse, passing turn. Brandon recasts Ashaya, following up with a Scoot Swarm. He then plays a Dryad Arbor, making a token copy of the Scoot Swarm. Brandon then replays the Oracle of Moldiah, which because of Ashaya being out, comes in as a forest, and makes him another Scoot Swarm token. At the end of turn, Matt flashes in Thrix, the Sudden Storm, drawing a card. Matthew recasts Kodama, which Matt responds to with the Voracious Great Shark to counter Kodama, drawing him a card. Matthew then recasts Kodama again from the command zone, drawing off Garruk's Uprising as it enters. He then casts a Peregrine Drake, untapping 5 lands, and putting Urian into play. Urian targets the Avenger and the Peregrine Drake. We then move to his end step, and he puts the creatures back into play, which triggers Kodama again, and allows him to put an Acidic Slime and a land. Matthew makes 17 more plants this time, and he targets the Phyrexian Processor, which forces me to activate it, making a token, and then gaining 27 life. I cast a Regal Behemoth, becoming the Monarch and gaining some life. I'm then able to easily recast the Nyxbloom Ancient, and once that's out, put out a Godpharaoh's Gift. I move to combat, and exile a Regal Force from my graveyard, drawing 3 cards as it enters, and gaining 4 life. I then move to my end step, drawing from being the Monarch, and passing. Matt plays a land, and passes, to which Matthew responds by casting Teferi's Time Twist to exile Urian, which draws him a card off the Glade Muse, and targets the Avenger, Acidic Slime, and Peregrine Drake with the Urian trigger as it enters. He also gets a Kodama's trigger, and puts out a land. Brandon casts a Fyndhorn Elves, which as it enters, makes him another Scoot Swarm, because it's technically a forest, and then a Noxious Revival, putting Finale of Devastation back on top. Matt makes a deal with Brandon, and casts a Clique, having Brandon put a card from hand on the bottom and draw it. Brandon then casts the Finale where X is 10, Matthew responds by trying to flash out a Torrential Gearhulk, and Matt responds to this with Venser, Shaper Savant. Venser resolves and bounces the Gearhulk back to Matthew's hand, which Matthew then tries to cast once more, and as it enters, draws a card. Matt then casts the Petty Half of Brazen Borrower, bouncing Matthew's Kodama to hand, and then the Finale gets countered as the Torrential Gearhulk enters, and targets Matthew's Arcane Denial. With nothing else, Brandon passes through his phases, and at the end of turn, Matthew's stuff comes back into play, drawing more cards from the Uprising, making more plants, and using the Acidic Slime to blow up my Nyxbloom Ancient. Matthew plays a land and recasts Kodama. He then casts a God Eternal Ronus, doubling the power of his creatures, and a Farhaven Elf to put another land into play. Matt, at this point, is trying to politic himself into a second place, and Matthew then casts a Regrowth to get back Drawn from Dreams, casting it and digging 7 deep to put 2 into hand. He casts an Ephemerate, flickering the Torrential Gearhulk, and as it enters, draws himself a card, and then casts Drawn from Dreams again, this time for free. He then moves to combat, and fearful of Matt's responses, he swings half of his plants at me, and half of his plants at Brandon to take us both out. Matt, having talked himself out of dying, just plays a land and passes. Matthew rebounds the Ephemerate and flickers the Torrential Gearhulk on his turn, getting back the Regrowth, to which Matt responds with a Teferi Mage of Zalafir, preventing Matthew from casting said Regrowth. Matthew then casts a Brainstorm, and once he's done that, follows up with a Venser the Sojourner. He plays a land, putting more counters around, and then casts an Azor the Lawbringer. Once that's resolved, he downticks Venser to make his creatures unblockable, and moves to combat, swinging 17 of his plants at Matt, to which Matt responds by casting Aetherize to get rid of them. Matthew then casts a Leyline of Anticipation, which unfortunately gets overridden because of Teferi either way, and he passes turn. At the end of Matthew's turn, Matt flashes out a Lochmere Serpent. Matt, who's somehow still alive at this point, sacrifices an island to his serpent to make it unblockable, and swings 7 at Matthew, passing turn. Matthew draws, and then activates Fencer once more, making his creatures unblockable again, and goes to combat. In response, Matt casts Death Sprout and targets Azor, drawing him a card from the Glade Muse, and the creature is then destroyed, and Matt gets to go and find a land to put into play. Matthew then swings 20 of his plants at Matt, to which he starts slinging out spells to dig for a response, but with no answer, the game ends in a fitting way as there can only be one Matthew at this table. Game review time. So this was a long one. I think it clocked in at about 2 hours and 45 minutes, so the fact that I was able to condense it down to this is nothing short of a miracle. Considering the length, there weren't actually that many board wipes outside of 1 Cyclonic Rift and 1 Evacuation, so I'm not too sure why it went so long. I had a ton of mana doublers going on with Trostani, which was great, but unfortunately I wasn't drawing any of my big finishers to use that mana on, so I just kinda sat there spinning my wheels. Matthew's Ishai and Kodama deck was pretty sweet to see, and I did skip some of the Kodama triggers later on in the game because mostly he was just playing lands and getting bigger and bigger plant tokens, or should I say broccoli tokens, as the game went on. He got a ton of value out of that, not to mention the Urian and all the blink effects that he ran in his deck. I was also a huge fan of Brandon's deck, and that Mosswort Bridge hiding Azuri's Predation was beautiful. It was such a clean board wipe when he was able to get it out, and being left with 17 beasts even after they all fought stuff was incredible, and I think he was going to win the game had it not been for some bounces. Matt, aka Mountain Mage, had a sweet Flash Tribal deck, and I have to laugh at how well he played in other people's turns despite the fact that most of his turns involved just playing a land and passing. I was really smitten with that Glade Muse in this game, so much so that I went and picked up 3 copies for myself, although I'm not entirely sure what I'd play them in. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents